I once had an introduction. Literally, this was the introduction. I quote. Guy said, this is Rabbi Becher, who's from South Africa, and he's usually pretty good. And he sat down. Well, first of all, that was insulting. I'm not from South Africa. I'm from Australia. And secondly, just what? Usually pretty good.
Rabbi Mordechai Becher is a world-renowned teacher, lecturer, and author whose latest book, Gateway to Judaism, is in its 10th printing. Originally from Australia, Rabbi Becher is known for his Torah wisdom, his dry wit, and his encyclopedic knowledge of Jewish history. Rabbi Becher taught at Ohr Somayach in Yerushalayim, where I was privileged many years ago to sit in on his memorable classes and lectures. He's an alumni rabbi of Neve Yerushalayim, an instructor at YU, and did I mention he also served in the IDF? In this lively conversation, we discuss the power of a great title for your talk.
With the titles, what I'd like to do is create a feeling in the person who reads the title that this is not going to be same old, same old.
How to make the sources you quote come to life for the audience.
If I quote a source, I will usually give a very brief background bio to that source.
What to do when you're not connecting with the audience.
Sometimes I look at someone who's like completely, their face is like blank. If I can get that person to smile or laugh, I feel, done it.
And a great joke you can use to get people to graciously turn off their cell phones before you begin speaking. Rabbi Becher is a natural-born teacher who wants everyone who attends his classes to walk away with a positive association with Torah Judaism.
I want people to have a enjoyable, inspirational, fun experience with someone who's teaching Torah.
I learned so much from this interview, and I'm sure you will too. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Rabbi Mordechai Becher. I've never seen such great titles of lectures as the ones that you come up with. They are so fascinating. They just draw you right in. I'm just thinking of one recently I came across, which was Halloween, Harry Potter, and pumpkin spice lattes. And there's the famous Guns N' Moses. That was I remember that back in '99. And you seem to have some very, very catchy titles for your lectures, and I'm curious how you come up with them. Let's start with that. How do you decide on a title?
Well, I've got to say, my mentor in titles is Rabbi Avram Rothman, who is the rabbi of Aish Community Shul in Thornhill in Canada. We worked together for Ohr Somayach in Thornhill for 4 years. And he is very, very, aside from being a Torah scholar and a wonderful person, he's very well versed in popular culture, rock music, etc., etc. So he inspired me. He came up with a lot of great titles. He had a title for a class about magic and superstition. It was called Things That Go Bump in the Night. Right. He gave me a title for a class on Purim, 3 Corners, 2 Guys, and a Night in Persia. And I said, what am I supposed to speak about? He said, anything you want. It's just like, so I think what I learned from him is if the title has got some reference to some popular culture that people get, right? Like Guns N' Moses, it was it will already intrigue someone to say this is not just going to be a standard Musar talk, right? So that's what I think I want to with the titles. What I'd like to do is create a feeling in the person who reads the title that this is not going to be same old, same old. And if the title is something like that, then yeah. I gave a class for some kollel. It was an outreach thing, and so it was about the Haggadah. So I called it, Daddy, why isn't Charlton Heston in the Haggadah? So now that's already an old reference. This is a while back. Right? Not everyone knows what I'm talking about. It was like Charlton Heston, right? So they said, can we change that to, instead of, Daddy, can we change it to Tati? Okay. And they said, and can we change Charlton Heston to Moshe? And then then in the end, they took out Daddy and they wrote Charlton, why isn't Moshe in the Haggadah? So now that's just standard. You know what I mean? So they they took the teeth out of that title. Titles can be very important. I gave a class, I was in Brookline, Massachusetts a few weeks ago. So I gave a shiur there which I called Trusting God and Buy Life Insurance, right? Which is an allusion to the famous First World War thing, trusting God and pass the ammunition, right? So, in that, the organizers changed it without asking that to trusting God but buy life insurance, which I objected at the beginning of my lecture. I said, actually, that's incorrect. It's not however or but or a caveat. I said there's no contradiction between trusting in God and buying life insurance. That's why I had and as opposed to, so to be careful about title, I think it's important. I remember Rav Nachman Bullman Oliver Shalom, who was an Ohr Somayach, was asked to give a talk on suffering. So he told him, I'll talk about, I forgot the title. The subtitle was A Jewish Approach to Suffering. The organizers wrote The Jewish Approach to Suffering. Rav Bullman spent the first 10 minutes of the lecture explaining why this is not it's A. I'm not claiming I'm the Jewish approach to suffering. It's one of the Jewish approaches up. So I think two things I want to, I would like to portray accuracy in the title. And secondly, maybe more importantly, I want it to be something that will spark a person's interests and to realize it's not, etc. Right? Especially if I'm giving a class for women, where I pretty much I don't speak differently, men or women, it makes no difference, right? But I try to be a little more careful that the title should not be one of these generic. I was in Israel, just got back Sunday, so I spoke in Givat Ze'ev for women. So I said to my daughter, who organized the class, I said, so what do you want? Lashon Hara, Shalom Bayis, Chizuk, or maybe technology. So she knew I was joking, right. My daughter. But I stay far away from that type of stuff where in the person's mind, as soon as they see the title, it's same old, same old. Already turn them off before they even come. They may not even come.
The titles are really so intriguing and so catchy. Do you ever wonder that maybe they overshadow or, for lack of a better term, disappoint the audience when they end up hearing something a little bit, it's got obviously more token than Harry Potter and Halloween or, spice lattes and things like that. Does that ever cross your mind? Is that an issue that you think about?
No. And I in my experience, I don't have any scientific evidence for this, but in my anecdotal experience, I don't think that's the case. That hasn't happened. I'll tell you what, if I could rant for a minute or so, one of the things that really annoys you, when you talked about disappointment, is when the person introduces a lecturer. So two types of either they could give you the facts. Teachers here did this, which is, I think, ideal. Because that way it gives the person an idea, okay, why should I even listen to this guy? Okay, he's got this and this credentials and this experience and so on. When a person gets up and gives the intro, sought after lecturer, meaningless, stupid, right? Famous, right? Come on, right? They're already here. You don't have to hype, right? The more you hype, the more chance there is of disappointment. If you just say, teachers at Yeshiva University, rabbi for Neve Yerushalayim, alumni, etc., then fine. Okay, right, well, fine, right. But if you start to go, funniest rabbi I've ever heard, great. What seriously? That means it's just like people don't think, right? They're setting up for disappointment and failure because based on it's like the opposite end is a terror. I once had an introduction. Literally, this was the introduction. I quote. Guy said, this is Rabbi Becher, who's from South Africa, and he's usually pretty good. And he sat down. Well, first of all, that was insulting. I'm not from South Africa. I'm from Australia. And secondly, just what? Usually pretty good. That's the opposite extreme. But again, the only time there is I don't think the topics give a chance for disappointment, right? Unless you don't talk about what the topic said. That's a problem, right? In other words, if the topic said, Jewish approach to combat ethics, and instead I talk about, shalom bayis, actually they're related, but if that's disappointment, right? But if I do talk about the topic, I don't think that's a problem.
Uh-huh. And so how much time do you put into a topic title?
I don't really have an answer to that. I'll tell you why, because certain things which I've researched and learned and spoken about, right? But there's a precise topic which I haven't spoken about, but I've researched it. I've got stuff on it. So sometimes it takes me very, very little time to put it together, because maybe it's a subject that I've studied and so on. If it's something which I haven't thought about or studied, that will take me a significantly longer time. But you said you're interviewing veterans. You should have introduced the adjective a grizzled veteran. I'm a grizzled veteran, which means I have actually, discussed and talked about many, many topics over the years. So I guess as time goes on, it takes me less time to prepare because, I have a filing system on my computer where I have topics and so on and so forth. So I can,
Yeah.
So it's hard to say. I don't really have a.
Okay. Let me ask you about the structure, because you have a wealth of information in terms of, Torah knowledge, Jewish history, all sorts of things. How do you structure your talk so that it doesn't just become a knowledge dump? How do you, is there an arc to it? Is there how do you intersperse the stories and anecdotes and humor in between the facts? Is there a specific structure that you try to follow?
Well, the truth is that is a challenge for me because I do like to dump information. So it is a challenge. What I usually do, my process, is I put all the sources together. Right? Let's say on an outline in front of me on sources. I then go through it and start eliminating sources which are not that relevant, not that interesting, don't add anything new, etc. And once I've done that, I get a much more streamlined, efficient group of sources that I would like to present. In other words, I've tried to eliminate. It was my initial desire is massive information dump, download into your head, right? And what I do is by going through those sources and eliminate, that's not going to add, that's repetitious, etc. I start cutting things down. As I'm doing that also, I'm thinking of what would be an interesting parallel secular source to that, which I will research and look into, right? And put that in as well. I think it, is speaking to people in the language of their culture, right? So I think that's important part of language. Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch would quote Goethe and other great German poets and so on and so forth. That's totally legitimate, and that's something which I always, vast majority of the time, I will try to infuse some of our common culture, secular culture, intellectual history, and so on and so forth. So I try to do that. Usually it will come to me, some type of joke might come to me and say, that's a great story or a great joke. Sometimes it comes to me during the lecture, in which case we'll say it. So that's really the process. I do have a tendency that when I quote depending on the audience, but if I quote a source, I will usually give a very brief background bio to that source, so which I think is important. I think people should know that. If I say, well, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, so I've just quoted Yehuda Halevi to an audience that probably doesn't know who he is, which means it's very nice, etc., but it doesn't add anything for them. But if I say Yehuda Halevi was a great Jewish politician, physician, poet, Torah scholar, rabbi, who lived in Spain, who was a rock star in Spain, who moved to Israel at the end of his life, and he wrote 800 poems about the land of Israel. That type of gives him a little personality, and it makes him more human. And again, it's like the intro, where it gives you reason. Oh, so he lived in Spain at this and this time. Maybe I should listen. In other words, I want to try to give a little bit of it. So that at the risk of information overload, I have to balance that with the fact that I want to give people context to these statements and these people and give them a sense of connection to them. I think that's important as well.
Yeah. Are there any sources that you consider to be off limits that you won't quote or won't go into, maybe who's behind the source? Let's say, for example, like you're quoting a rock band or something like that, and if you quote them, then maybe there's a thought that, okay, well, now I'm introducing to them, they're going to be curious about something, and they'll go back and research that, and I don't want to use that source so that to take them down that road. Or
I'm not. No, unless sometimes if I'm speaking, there are places I speak, like a Frum Masivta Yeshiva High School, right, where I know that if I ever want to be back there again, I probably should not be quoting Taylor Swift. You know what I mean? So I do sometimes practice self-censorship in terms of sources. On the whole, regular audiences, not high school, from high school kids, etc. I you know what I mean? It's not like my mentioning it is going to make it more, I think there's so much information out there and so much negativity, etc. I don't think that it's a big deal. They start to say, Kansas? Is that a city? No, it's a rock band. It's a great, right? So, okay, they'll listen to Kansas. Who cares? Like, what, they're going to become a Christian because some of the Kansas members. I don't think that's a realistic fear. So I don't worry about it. I did speak. I've spoken a few times in Williamsburg. So I spoke at this place in Williamsburg for a Satmar audience about Torah Shabbal Peh. So I said to them when they were calling me to speak, I said, listen, I do quote from a wide variety of sources, both Jewish and non-Jewish. I might bring in something from the Christian scriptures. I'll bring in something from a secular philosopher. The guy says, that's all fine, just not Rav Kook. So they're okay with the New Testament, not Rav Kook. Like, that's a little perverse, but okay. But usually I don't worry about that. I bring in a source. Have I been called out on that? Yes. Some people have said to me, I don't know how you can quote that. I wrote an article. I had a newspaper editor write to me that secular sources have no place in the Torah newspaper. I said, I don't know. I said, I'm a Talmud of Rabbi Moshe Shapiro. I've heard him quote Nietzsche in class. I've heard him quote and recommend reading If by Rudyard Kipling. He has quoted entire paragraphs from Immanuel Kant. The Rambam cites Aristotle and others. His son, Rabbi Avrom, quotes from Sufi Muslim mystics. Chova Salvovas quotes from Muslim scholars. Right? What exactly is your? Right? Would you not have them write in your newspaper? So I think they're wrong. I mean, I think it's you are allowed to quote Chochma Bagoyim Tamin. Wisdom is found amongst the nations. And there is a lot of wisdom there. And also, again, if I am trying to express an idea of the Torah, if I can express it through something which is already familiar to people, then I think that's helpful. That is very helpful. And, maybe next time they think or hear of that phrase or that song, etc., that may actually prompt them to think of a Torah idea. A Jewish idea rather than what the author intended.
So, let me ask you about some of your background. You're from Australia, and at what point did you move to Israel?
Well, grew up in Australia, and when I finished high school, I went to yeshiva in Israel. So I moved to Israel I wasn't planning on staying there. I was planning on staying for a year and going back to engineering school in Australia. I ended up staying for a second year, deferred my place in college. Then after my third year, they said, we can't hold your place. So I changed from engineering to general science faculty, held the place for another 2 years. After 4 years, I said, listen, don't think I'm coming back. So I stayed in Israel, was at Yeshivas Itri, and later on, that's where I met some of my Reb Shlomo Fisher, Oliver Sholem, and Rav Asher Rubenstein, and amazing Rebbeim and close friends I'm still in contact with today. Many, many good friends from Itri, Rabbi Yeshua Karsh, who is a rabbi in Northbrook, Illinois, Torah Learning Center, Dr. Michael Wolshansky, head of pediatric gastroenterology at Hadassah, who I just saw in Israel. So, still in contact with these people since 1978, 79, 80. And then there was a split from Itri, and a new yeshiva called Mishkan HaTorah started. That used to be called Split Tree. And that's where Reb Moshe Shapiro became Rosh Yeshiva. And I was there for many years. Then, got married, was in Kollel there for a while, then taught at Ohr Somayach in Israel and Neve Yerushalayim in Israel, then moved. I was in Canada for 4 years, working for Ohr Somayach there, Thornhill, Ontario, then back to Israel. Then in 2000, came to the States where I worked for Gateways for quite a while. And then past 12 years or so, I've been teaching at full-time at Yeshiva University. And my long association with Neve Yerushalayim, so I am the alumni rabbi for Neve Yerushalayim as well. And I do a lot of tours and gigs. And
Yeah. At what point you were in the IDF?
I was in the IDF in the 90s, Yeah, I was in what's called Shlav Beit, which is people who made Aliyah older. So I'd been in yeshiva. Interesting, actually, I was in Kollel, married, and so I had the yeshiva deferment until that time, and then I was going to get a job teaching at Ohr Somayach. So legally, you're supposed to, if you're teaching, you no longer have the yeshiva deferment, although most people take it. So I did not feel that was right. So I asked Reb Moshe Shapiro what I should do. He said, ask Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which I did, and he said I should go to the army. So at that point, I enlisted and did shorter service than 18-year-olds, but I served in the rabbinate of the army. I have 2 sons who are serving now. So one's a paratrooper and the other one is in armored infantry.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I remember a story you told once where you said you were late to shir with Reb Moshe Shapiro, and you ran in your uniform. And remember the story?
Yeah. I was actually very proud of myself that I got off base in order to go to the shir. I came in with a gun and uniform, and he looks up as I walk in. He says, "Oh, our hero." Deflated my ego significantly with the sarcastic, but
yeah, that was a very, very memorable story. How do you find stories? I mean, you obviously have some personal stories, but where do you go looking for stories?
I don't.
Or do you have a process? Do you curate?
I don't. I'm embarrassed, but I should. I know some people keep them on index cards and this and that and have a file, but I usually, I've thank God a good memory. So if I hear a good story and I feel it's relevant to a class, I'll just put in a couple of key words in my notes and I remember it. I don't have to have the whole story. I just this, right? And stories are an interesting problem. The purpose of a story is to connect the audience to your words and to you. Right? It's like a mashal, like mishlei, right? So I try to avoid stories that will disconnect people, right? So, for example, stories from the shtetl, I don't feel connected to the shtetl, right? Dirt floors, murdering Cossacks, anti-Semitic government. It's like, it's not something I feel, so I don't feel like or fanciful stories about the prince who was thrown out of his palace by the king, which are great. I understand them, but it doesn't speak to people. Most people, when they think of a prince, they think of Harry. You know what I mean? It's not like, similar ideas. So I do try to avoid those type of stories. If I do hear a story, once I hear the story, I will research it to see if it's accurate to the extent that I can. Some stories it's not possible to know if it's accurate. Sometimes you can know it's inaccurate. That drives me crazy, right? When I hear people telling a story about this town, it was the year this and this, and I happen to know that town didn't exist in that year, or just like some random fact. I said, why? Right? And stories which are so blatantly and obviously untrue, just for the interactions of the people. And then he said that there is no way any normal human being would do that. I heard some rabbi telling a story many stories, and I would say probably conservative estimate 80% were sheker gomor, and the others were just exaggerated. But I don't know, seriously, you get story he gets on a plane. Actually, I don't want to tell the story because people might know who the rabbi is. So, but it does annoy me, stories which are clearly inaccurate historically, and stories which depict, and this unfortunately is something you hear from rabbis, depict people who are not us in a very negative light, and depict us, whoever us is, right, as being wow, awesome. I don't know if there's a value, and you hear people say a story about the non-Jew who helped them in the middle of the night in a terrible neighborhood. He must have been Eliyahu Hanavi. No, maybe he was a nice person, right? It's like the idea that if he must be Eliyahu Hanavi, otherwise what? No, maybe he's a good, decent human being, right? Well, it doesn't. So I don't know. There are so many things that disturb me. This could go on for hours if I continued. So I'm going to stop here. But with stories, I do try to see if they're accurate, right? And certainly not blatantly contradicting well-known historical facts, etc. That's I think important and relevant. Yeah, the story should be relevant.
Yeah. I remember a story you told when you visited Columbus, and you told a story about, I think the topic was humor, the benefit of humor. And you talked about someone who was so depressed that he was going to jump off a boat. Do you remember that story? And someone cheered him up by saying, he said, when you get down there, say hi to the Livyasam for me.
Oh, no. That's not exactly no, the story was Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, 19th century, in Danzig, Gdansk. One of his students slipped in the mud and fell into a river, and he's being carried along by the current and had given up hope. None of them could swim, right? So as they're running along the river near him, who's just being carried away, Reb Simcha Bunim yells at the guy in the river. He says, "Give him grist to Leviathan, give regards to the Leviathan." And then something changed, and the guy started thrashing around and actually got close enough to show they could pull him out. So that's actually mentioned in a couple of Hasidic Ramatayim Sofim, and also in Siach Sarfei Kodesh. And there's the third source, I forgot the third source, which Rav Simcha Bunim understood that Ki b'simcha seitzeyu, Pasuk says, you'll go forth with joy. He says, I understood it literally. When you have simcha, you can get out of anything. I saw yiush, I saw despair in this guy's mind. I saw on his face that he'd given up hope. I figured if I can inject a little bit of happiness, one neuron will say to the other, dude, that was funny. That will save him. He can save himself, which is actually what happened. Yes, that's the story. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an amazing story, and it was very memorable. When you speak, every speech probably has its own purpose and goal. But do you have any overriding goals for when you speak? Are you trying to transform, uplift, educate? A combination of the three?
Yes. Yeah. Well, a few things. Yeah, I ultimately I see my goal is to teach Torah in a way that will be relevant and inspiring and entertaining. But my primary goal, teach Torah. If I give a class or a talk or a short speech, etc., first, I feel it's a requirement that it must have enough content that a person will have to say Birchas HaTorah before they listen. I don't mean from a technical halachic perspective, but to hear someone give a speech, even if it's 5 minutes, if he's a representative of Judaism, Torah, a rabbi, and that speech, you wouldn't, if you did not say Birchas HaTorah, you'd be cool. I find that a travesty. Right? So my prime goal, teach Torah. Right? That's number one. I would say I want people to have a enjoyable, inspirational, fun experience with someone who's teaching Torah. So even if they don't remember the content, and they'll have a positive experience with someone who looks like me, like a yarmulke, a beard, etc., which is a good thing. I think that's something else. So my prime goal is teaching Torah. Sorry, prime directive. Oh yeah, as in Star Trek. Yeah, prime directive is teaching Torah, right? And there are many other components in it. You know what I mean? Right, it depends who I'm speaking to also as to what the goal is. Yeah, that's very much dependent. Yeah.
How often are you given a topic versus given the license to select the topic yourself when you speak, when you go on lectures?
Most of the time, well, it's a bit of a hybrid. In other words, I have a list of, let's say, 350 or so topics, which I will send to the location, so you can choose any you want. All right. So it's possible that what they want is not on the list. Right. It's unlikely, but it's possible. Right. In which case, then I will, say, if I have time, okay, I'll prepare a new class on that subject. But usually it's something that's on the list, but I usually let them choose. But first of all, I assume that the locals know the audience better than I do. Right. So they may know, but not always true. Not always true. I recently spoke at a school for the 12th grade and then for the 11th. So they chose a great topic for the 12th graders, which went extremely well. The topic they chose was, why are there so many mitzvot? Right, which is a good topic. It spoke about the details of halacha and so on, very entertaining, very informative, etc. Explains halacha, Gemara, etc. in one shot. The second topic, which they said for the 11th grade, was, do I have to take Medrash literally? Now, the answer is no, but I elaborated on that. But it is a topic, but it's usually a topic which is maybe for a little more advanced group. It's not something that 11th graders are thinking of. It's a strange Midrash. Do I have to take that literally or not? So I should have. Sometimes I feel that I should, and I do try to do that. Feedback. We have a conversation. This is a topic, like, for example, I spoke, again, this was another place I spoke at, Malava Malka for women. They wanted me to speak about some classic woman's topic. And I said, no. I said, when I speak to women, vast majority of the time, I will refrain and avoid classic topics that are always given to women. Because they're always given to women. Why? What, they're not interested in other stuff? They're interested in lots of other stuff. So I insisted on a different topic. I said, choose a different one. So he chose from my list. And it was not Lashon Hara, Chizuk, Tznius, Shalom Bayis, or technology. It was none of those. None of the above.
You speak to so many different types of people, so many different backgrounds, ages, genders. How do you connect when you first meet a new crowd? Do you have? Is there anything that you specifically do to try to connect with them if you're meeting people for the first time when you're speaking to a new audience?
Yeah, I think opening with some type of joke, story, right, remark of a local character, etc., I think is very helpful. That already creates a connection. Milsa dibdichusa, to start with it puts people at ease. It creates a connection. So, depending on who the audience is and what I will say, maybe if it's a high school, I might say, well, thank you everyone for coming. Oh, I forgot you have to come. Okay, but so they'll right, yeah, they have to be here, so etc. So a little bit of a connection. Right? I understand that you don't want to be here and you were forced to come by because otherwise it'll whatever. So that type of thing. That's just an example, random, but I do try to establish some type of connection. Sometimes a shout out to someone I know in the audience, if that's applicable. But I think it's important to establish that somehow. Just puts people a little more at ease.
Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you just cannot connect with the audience in front of you? Or just nothing?
I've had that. Usually, it's not with everyone. Usually, I connect with sometimes some people, but yeah, there are times that I've had that I just feel I'm not connecting with the majority of the people there. Yeah.
And so, what do you do under those circumstances?
I type of focus my energy on the people that I can see in the audience who are connected, and that creates in me something positive energy, and that does rub off sometimes, right, on those who are right, who I feel I'm not connecting to. I sometimes look at someone who's like completely, their face is like blank. If I can get that person to smile or laugh, I feel, oh, done it. Right? So yeah, I will. I may say a joke and looking at them at the time, and so that does help me. I don't know if it helps them, but it helps me.
Did you study speaking? Did you have a natural knack for it? Some of your influences, role models for speaking?
Well, many of my teachers in school felt that I spoke way too much, so I guess that might be. I used to. But I had a lot of great role models who were excellent orators and speakers, who I type of learnt from and modeled myself on in many ways. Amongst them, Reb Shlomo Fisher, Oliver Sholem, who was a Gaon Atzum, who was at Itri Yeshiva, Rav Asher Rubenstein, who was a excellent speaker, and later then Reb Moshe Shapiro, who aside from being a Gaon and a huge Talmid Chacham, was also an excellent speaker. A lot of just excellent in so many ways. His language was clear. He's excellent speaker. Another two people that I used to listen to when I first started, I used to listen to Rav Natan Lopez Cardoza, excellent speaker, and Rav David Gottlieb of Ohr Somayach. So these are people who I listened to and were very helpful in cultivating a speaking style. And I can't say I've imitated any of them, but I've incorporated stuff from them. One aspect of speaking, which I don't know where I got it from, but is an aversion to sermonizing and an affinity for speaking normally, like a normal human being, right? Which I type of like, there were some people who inspired me by turning me off what they were doing, right? No, it was negative inspiration. Oh man, that's like, I can't listen to this, right? Someone who shouts at me, someone who sings songs right, things to me. Someone who speaks in a very formal, stunted style, right? In the classic sermon style, which to me, I think just turns me off. I don't know if it turns other people off, or maybe just turns them to sleep. But that is something which, again, there were people who inspired me not to do that. None of the above. They were all positive inspirations. But I would listen to certain people and say, there's no way. If I ever speak like that, shoot me. Right. So I think normal speaking, natural speaking, I think I might call it conversational tone, I think is at least something which I don't strive for. That's how I talk.
Yeah. Let me ask you about, because you've been speaking for so long, not today, I mean, for the history of your speaking. How has attention spans affected the way you speak? The today's attention spans.
It's difficult to know. I don't have any empirical data on attention spans, and I was told that there is not a lot of evidence that attention spans have gotten shorter. I don't know. Again, I got a son who's a statistician, and my wife is a teacher in educational psychology and stuff like that. So they both seem to think that there's not statistical evidence that attention spans have got shorter. So all this is anecdotal. But I would say, in terms of my college students, at least, I think I'm continuously in competition with their devices. So they may have a great attention. They might be able to look at their social media for hours. That means a great attention span. But the problem is they're supposed to listen to me for the next 45 minutes, right? So that's a huge issue, is the competition with people's devices. I assume there's a higher degree of that competition with college students than with, let's say, more mature audiences. But it's still a matter of competition. You often in an audience, again, not on Shabbos, but although it's happened on Shabbos, but where people are, they're not with you because they're on. So that's not because of the attention span per se. That's because of distraction, and I think we are very distracted. That appears to me to be a major issue of distraction. But I think if the subject matter is interesting to people, and you are not only informative but also somewhat inspiring, and possibly also, I don't aim for inspiration, but somewhat entertaining, then I think people have the ability to listen for much longer than you'd imagine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you ask people to turn off their phones before you begin, or how do you deal with the competition?
I sometimes do that. Yeah, usually the person introducing will do that. That's very common nowadays. The person introducing will ask people. I sometimes steal a line from my good friend Rabbi Jonathan Rietti, who's someone you should probably interview, who will tell people, please put your phones on silence in consideration of those who are sleeping. So that gets a chuckle, and it's unfortunately true. But anyway, so yeah, I sometimes ask that. Yeah, but usually I let the person introducing does that. I don't do that with certain audiences because it just it puts me in the mode of being the teacher, disciplinarian, etc. So if I'm teaching at a high school or something like that, I'm not going to say anything like that. Right, and let the teachers take care of that type of stuff. That's not my job, and I don't want to be associated with that job. I was recently at a beginner's service in Aish Thornhill with Rabbi Rothman. I was there for Shabbos Shuvah and Yom Kippur, this last Shabbos Shuvah and Yom Kippur. The beginner service, we're non-frum, we had 50, 60 non. There were people in there with phones. Yom Kippur. It's like, I'm not going to say anything. So,
yeah. Have you ever received any negative feedback besides, let's say, the sources that we talked about earlier? Have you ever received any feedback? People saying like that's not what we were expecting, or what would be some of the situations where you didn't meet expectations, and where did you see maybe that there was a disconnect from the beginning?
Interesting question. I don't, not to say that there hasn't been, but I don't remember. Negative feedback that I've gotten has not been of that type. The negative feedback that I've gotten has not been that I didn't address the topic, but not usually, but when it's happened, has been things like they object to something I said. Right? I gave a talk about Maharal, in which during the course of it, I mentioned that I did not believe that he made a golem. Someone said that's apikoresis. I said, which one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim did I transgress? Did I, it's no, they can, So I've gotten apikoresis, claims. I've gotten from some crowds that I'm a Zionist and hence a denier of all the Gedolim. I say, look, I am a Zionist. I agreed that the Satmar Rebbe would not agree with me, right? But it's not like I have no Gedolim on my side. Like everyone agreed with the Satmar Rebbe? No, right? So I've had that a few times. People objected to things that I've said. Maybe once or twice, I think I've had people say that I didn't address the issue that was on the topic. But I think that was because they maybe misunderstood the topic. I don't think it was, hard to prove, but I don't think they've had that. But the objections I've had is usually to the content, not to, you didn't address the issue that you set out to address. I have had some constructive criticism. It was excellent. I was in Dallas a little while ago, and someone made actually a great point that I'd left out one of the primary ideas in my Dvar Torah, and he was right. I type it. It does happen. If I've been, I'm tired or whatever it is, I might have to leave out a point. That's legitimate, and so I'm happy he mentioned that. Now, for the next, every time I give that same idea Dvar Torah, I'm going to include specifically what he said, because that is, a major point. So I'm very happy when there's that type of criticism, because I can correct that. And I want that type of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So the flip side of that is some of the times that you've really hit it out of the park. Some things. Maybe some talks in history of your talking that you really feel that you made a Roshem, a real deep impression, maybe inspired some change, things like that. Can you think back to some of those examples? It's very, very hard, because I don't even know what the impact is, right? The impact may not be, I've had, classes where people have, which is a little unusual, people have burst into applause afterwards. I guess, those have been cases where, I spoke in Queens at the outbreak of the war, and got but on the other hand, that may not be because of what I said. People were very emotional and rah rah Yisrael Chai. It's like, it's going to get I don't know. It's hard to know, very hard to know. But I have had very positive feedbacks, and many, thank God. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be in this if I didn't feel that I had positive impact and positive feedback, etc. But I do get people who say, that speech was like, but I don't usually find that out until much later. I don't necessarily find that out at the time, and I don't even remember what speech it was. And, I've had people say they were so inspired by something I said, and I'm thinking to myself, I actually didn't say that. And I say, you sure that was me? They said, absolutely, Australian Rabbi Becher. I said, all right. They made up something that they think I said, which inspired them, and said, I don't know. So it's very, very hard to know that type of stuff. Sometimes you can see on people's faces, right, that something clicked, and one of the most interesting compliments I had afterwards. A guy came up to me after a lecture, completely secular Jew. He says, Rabbi, some of the things you said actually made sense. Like he said, with a sense of total surprise and shock,
that some of the things I said, actually, I said, well, that's wonderful. He says, yes, it was very, thank you. And that so who knows? It's very hard to know that type.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question I want to ask you is, if someone's starting out on their speaking career, to teach Torah, convey Torah, what maybe two pieces of advice would you give them when they set out to start their speaking career, whether it's lectures like you do, or whether it's drushas, Shabbos in, Shabbos out? What mindset or attitude or approach or methods would you give if you had two pieces of advice?
Well, Chazal say, "Ein adam loimed Torah el b'makom sheli bo chafetz." It's actually two similar statements in Chazal, Gemara and Avodah Zarah. A person only learns Torah in the subject matter that they enjoy and from the person whom they desire. So I think from both of those, one, I would derive that it's got to be, when you teach, it should be something that you enjoy, you are passionate about, a source that you love. And so, in other words, because then it's going to be something which you're learning of the source is that much better. And hence your delivery will be also that much better. Once heard from Rabbi Yoshiv, who said that he said to someone, good friend of mine, Jeff Bear, asked him, what's the secret to Hatzlocha, success in learning? And he said, learn everything as though you have to teach it. When you learn something as though you have to teach it, so whenever you learn, if you're in a position like that, you should be learning it with mind. How would I teach this? Right? And obviously the subject matter that you learn is probably going to be motivated by something that you enjoy. You enjoy Maharal or of Hirsch or, et cetera, two very different approaches. I wouldn't minimize, I wouldn't restrict myself to just only to try to get a variety, but that'll be one thing. And secondly, that they should also, since a person also can only learn from someone they desire to learn from, you should try to make your learning something palatable. Yourself, your learning, your teaching, your speaking, that people will enjoy. Right? I feel it should be a enjoyable experience. I remember speaking at some large event on a Shivasar B'Tammuz. It was either that or Tisha B'Av. I think it was Shivasar B'Tammuz. And I asked Rabbi Moshe Shapiro beforehand. I said, I don't know if I can speak without telling a joke or something. I said, Shivasar B'Tammuz. He said, Beseder. He says, that's fine. He says, Zechelek mehamalocha. That's part of the work. It's part of the trade, right? So even then, so I do try to have in mind, will person enjoy this? Is this going to be an enjoyable experience for them? So those are two pieces of advice that I think I could probably say with confidence, because both of them I think are from Chazal, so I'm okay.
So good to speak to you again. All the best with your family, and Hashem should watch over your children, and
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now.